So I saw this post on Twitter the other day asking people which of Hiroaka's key visuals was their favorite, and that got me thinking. Key visuals are a significant part of the promotional and marketing process for an anime production, so I thought it might be a fun exercise to analyze the key visuals for each season of Hiroaka and how effective they are at both drawing the audience in and forecasting the events to come in each season. A lot of meaning and symbolism can be packed into these, so I didn't want the effort that went into them to go unnoticed. I will be sticking to just one key visual per season though, because there's actually a ton of promotional art that has mostly faded into the background, and I'd be here all day if I tried to analyze all of them. Also, I'd prefer to look at this one in particular as little as possible. Jesus Christ, this is ugly. Let's take a look at the main key visual for Season 1. On the surface, and I promise I'll only say this once in this video, it doesn't look too complex and almost standard for a show of this nature. A concentration of pure hype with how bright and poppy all the colors are, which works great to draw in an audience. However, it's in the finer points that we can see some fascinating details that might go unnoticed on just a casual glance. Obviously, Midoriya takes the central spot on the visual with him being the main character, but the fact that he's reaching forward is a nice touch. He's finally gotten his quirk, but he doesn't know how to use it properly yet. So he's still pretty far away from his goal of becoming a great hero, and yet he's still reaching for that goal with all his might. Speaking of might, let's talk about the other central character on this visual. Much like in the show, All Might is towering over everyone else as the #1 hero. The massiveness he's presented with here also reflects his relationship with Midoriya, who, once again, is still struggling to fill the role that All Might will eventually leave to him. It's also interesting that his body extends past all four edges of the picture, magnifying his control over the world he protects. The rest of the characters are portrayed pretty accurately as well. Bakugo looks sinister and aggressive, and yet he is placed under Midoriya, forecasting the inferiority that he starts to feel after Midoriya gains his quirk. Todoroki looks calm and collected, yet hides his scar by turning his head away. Along with only showing his ice powers and not his fire powers, this makes his motivations and internal struggles even more mysterious, which will later come to the forefront in Season 2. Uraraka is cute and bubbly, Mineta is panicking, Ida is rushing forward undauntedly, as per his role as class president, Kirishima is looking manly as hell, and Tsuyu is, well, Tsuyu. Then there's the background, which might actually be one of my favorite parts of this visual. Aside from being a strong choice to complement the rest of the colors, the symbolism that the color yellow evokes, mainly optimism, positivity, and hope, perfectly reflect the tone of the series. No matter what gets in Midoriya's way, he's always trying to stay positive and hold on to hope that he'll eventually figure out how to become a great hero. Likewise, All Might's status as the symbol of peace further reinforces this optimism, especially since the background seems to be radiating out of him. To top it all off, we have the text on the left side of the visual, Saiko no Hiro ni, meaning the best hero, a statement that applies to All Might in the present and Midoriya's aspirations for the future. All in all, a pretty strong key visual, very straightforward in its intent and effectively reflects the themes of the first season. Moving on from there, we have the main key visual for Season 2, which takes a more panel-based layout to its design, thus making it even more striking in its presentation, along with what is practically a rainbow of background colors. Purely on a structural level, this one is probably the most exciting at a glance because of how the different diagonal lines divide the visual into so many different frames like that of a manga, yet is still able to keep everything cleanly segmented. Much like with Season 1, Midoriya and All Might take up the center portion of this visual, though the dynamic between them appears to have changed. Instead of frantically jumping forward to the front of the frame, Midoriya is in a ground pound position, with the energy coming off of his fist showing that he has begun to master One for All, which is also reflected by the confident smile on his face. Additionally, rather than being larger than life, All Might appears at a more normal size over Midoriya's shoulder, literally watching over him. This more normalized size also tells us that Midoriya is getting closer to being like his mentor and achieving his dream. This is also bolstered by the tagline for this visual, Hiro wa yatte kuru. or Hero is Coming, conveniently positioned right next to Midoriya and All Might. Aside from that, there's still a decent amount of subtext going on with the other characters. The most obvious is Todoroki, who takes up just as much real estate on the visual as Midoriya, which makes sense since this is the season where Todoroki's conflict with his father is revealed. Rather than hiding his scar like in the last visual, the scar is now in full view, signaling that he'll have to confront this issue head on, though there's still a shadow covering his scar, further enhancing the struggle he'll be facing. In fact, shadow on faces is used quite a lot in this visual. Bakugo's eyes are covered as he is mostly left in the dark this season as to both how Midoriya keeps getting stronger and why Todoroki wouldn't take their own fight seriously enough, which eventually causes his rage to bubble out of control again, and as such he is pictured here as screaming. Half of Ida's face is covered, highlighting how he'll be grappling with his own moral code and hero identity in his conflict with Stain this season, and his ominous smile also forecasts his wavering morals. The entirety of Shinzo's face is also covered, symbolizing the resentment he holds in regards to not being recognized enough to get into the hero course. You can also see that he's glancing at Midoriya, signaling their upcoming battle. On the other hand, lack of shadow can also convey meaning. While Midoriya's forehead does contain some shadow, his eyes appear unburdened, meaning that he has found a clear way forward for his dream. Uraraka also seems mostly unburdened by shadow. She knows exactly what she needs to do, become a hero to make enough money to support her parents, so the only conflict she has this season is whether she's good enough to hang with the top stars, which she is. The last item of note with this visual is Endeavor, whose entire face isn't even shown. Only his sinister grin is visible, telling us that he's going to have at least some kind of antagonistic effect on the plot of this season, which we eventually learn is his desire to mold Todoroki into a hero who can achieve his own dream of surpassing All Might, no matter how much pain Todoroki is put through. That's pretty much all there is for this visual, which is unfortunate because, as you probably noticed, there are a lot of characters on here I haven't even talked about yet. Hatsume being here is a nice touch because she was a fairly popular character for a while, so it makes sense to forecast her debut, but some of the other characters kinda confuse me. Present Mike is okay since he's the announcer for the sports festival, but he also feels like an afterthought being stuck at the bottom of the frame. And I really don't get why Tokoyami is on here since he doesn't do anything significant in Season 2. Overall, a few faults that could have been fixed, but still a solid visual. Okay, so I didn't even notice until I was about to upload this that Aizawa is also in this key visual. And I guess that kind of speaks for itself that I looked at this thing dozens and dozens of times, and I didn't even notice him until I was about to be done. So that's all my thoughts on that. Next we have Season 3, which sports another classic character layout with the good guys versus bad guys pose. This one is probably the most complex structurally, so let's start with a feature that's unique to this specific visual. Much like in Season 1, All Might shows up in the background towering over the other characters. But this time the context is completely different considering that we now see him facing off against All for One, his arch enemy. Additionally, rather than having the same texture as the other characters, both All Might and All for One have a more faded look to them, as though they are fading into the background, which conveys a twofold meaning. First, the texture difference itself signifies that these characters will be operating on a completely different level from everyone else in the series, displaying their Lovecraftian power levels for all to see, further showing that even though everyone else is getting stronger, they're still miles below All Might and All for One. Second, the fact that they appear to be fading away foreshadows their fate to come after their final battle, with All for One finally being locked away in Tartarus and All Might losing the last of his power. In the foreground, we see Midoriya and Shigaraki facing off. Though this doesn't literally happen in this season, this face-off is much more symbolic in nature, as Midoriya and Shigaraki are the successors to All Might and All for One respectively. This section also contains my favorite element of this picture. Midoriya's hand is cut off by the border that separates the heroes and villains, conveying that Midoriya and the other students are still ill-equipped to defeat actual villains, thus resulting in their utter defeat at the summer camp, as he is not able to reach Shigaraki. I'm really starting to like this theme of reaching out in these visuals, which we'll come back to again with Season 4. Bakugo is once again positioned under Midoriya, as the conflict between them resurfaces at the end of this season as the result of Bakugo perceiving incompetence within himself. The idea of being inferior to the kid he used to pick on all the time slowly creeping deeper into his mind, combined with his inability to help All Might when he was kidnapped. As for everyone else, they mostly seem to just fill out the rest of the picture. Most of the hero characters are part of Bakugo's rescue squad, minus Yaoyorozu, so it makes sense for them to be the ones to fill out the blank space. The only one who isn't is Uraraka, who has her own face-off with Toga this season, along with some more complex emotions she has to deal with. It would have been nice for her to actually be facing Toga in this picture, but I can understand the logic of placing Toga as close to Midoriya as possible considering her obsession with him. With the villains, they basically just use the most relevant characters for this season, Mr. Compress, Muscular, and Dabi, to fill out the remaining space. As for color choices, the characters take up the vast majority of the space on the visual, so there's nothing particularly wrong with two different beige tones, though I would have liked to see something a bit brighter. Then we have the tagline. On the hero side, we have Zettai ni Mamote Miseru, meaning absolutely protect, while the left side reads Subete o Kawasu, meaning break everything, conveying a simplified version of each side's overall objectives for this season. A strong message to top off a strong key visual. Finally, we have Season 4, and this is where we're going to have to dive into spoiler territory, so if you haven't finished the Shie Hasaikai arc of the manga yet, you have been warned. The biggest difference between this visual and the first three is that All Might is no longer present. His powers have been completely exhausted, and so he no longer has control over the society he once protected. Instead, Midoriya is joined by Mirio in the center of the visual, a fitting choice considering both the immense amount of screen time they'll get, and the fact that they were both pinned as potential successors to All Might. Once again, both of them are reaching forward, and if we follow the vector of their hands, we see that it leads to Eri, the girl whom they fail to save at the start of this arc, and are desperate to rescue in order to stop her suffering. This is echoed by the tagline along the right side of the visual, Kimi no Hiro ni Naru, meaning become your hero, which is also echoed by events in the story. Eri herself is positioned in a defensive pose with a terrified look on her face, as she usually is in this arc. And above her we see the source of her suffering, Overhaul, whose face is entirely covered in shadow except for his eyes and mask, conveying both the immense threat that he poses and the fact that he is trying to rework the world from the shadows through the Yakuza. Adding a red outline to Eri's character also strengthens the relationship between her and Overhaul, as his eyes match this outline, making Eri's situation feel even more dire. As for everyone else, we have all the major characters that take part in the raid on Overhaul's base, though not a lot is conveyed about them through their positioning in this visual. I do like that the use of shadow on faces shows up again. This time it's with Sir Night-Eye, whose eyes are being covered, paralleling how he is unable to change his fate that he saw with his foresight abilities. On the other hand, both Midoriya and Mirio's faces are almost entirely free of shadow, showing that they are able to change the fate that Night-Eye saw. Unfortunately, the rest of the characters don't really say that much with their positioning or facial expressions. They're just taking up different action poses. And the only interesting one is Kirishima with how gung-ho he's being about this mission. As for the background, a circular sky template was certainly an interesting choice, as it makes it much easier to grab the audience's attention, especially with how the circular motion of the clouds is positioned around the characters. In terms of meaning, it could be conveying the idea of reaching to the sky for one's dreams, another parallel to Midoriya's as well as Mirio's aspirations. Now comes the difficult part. Which key visual is the best? In terms of general presentation and ability to grab attention, 2 and 4 are probably the best, though 1 and 3 are pretty good at that in their own ways. In terms of thematic conveyance, 3 is definitely out front, followed by 1 and 4, with 2 probably being last because it uses characters like Tokoyami who aren't even relevant in that season. Even after all of that analysis, it's kind of difficult for me to decide, but if I absolutely had to give an order, I would say 3, 4, 1, 2. Though to be honest, 3 is the only one whose position I'm confident in, and 4 is probably only as high as it is because basically any picture of Eri is intensely powerful. What really sells me on 3 being the best is this divide cutting off Midoriya's hand, reversing the fortune that the previous reaching imagery tried to convey, and it leaves a visceral impact because of how striking it is. So how would you rank these visuals, and are there any changes you'd make to them? Feel free to talk about it in the comments below. Special thanks to Jan Rogalski, Rourke Tenjoin, Christine Seibert, Call Me Catlord, Ryan Johnson, Eugenio Mendoza, and all my other patrons for their generous support. My name is Ember, and I'll see you next time.